Okay, we will go ahead and get started at 6:30. We'll call this meeting to order. Patty, can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Cholet, Stringer, Knack,
Here.
Whitehouse,
Here.
McCaffrey,
Here.
Carmen,
Here.
Sarter.
Here. Any additions or deletions from the agenda, Mr. Byrd?
None from staff.
Okay, anyone and from the public wish to speak on any non-agenda items? Nobody here. Can I have a vote to approve the meeting minutes from August?
So moved. Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Knack,
Yes.
Whitehouse,
Yes.
McCaffrey,
Yes.
Carmen,
Yes.
Sarter.
Yes. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and hop right into new business then, won't we? Mr. Byrd?
Thank you, Chairman. Cody Bird, Planning Director. I'm gonna sit here if that's all right. I'm gonna also have Ms. Lundy promote me to panelist so I can screen share in just a moment. Thank you. The information's in your packets, but I'll also use it as a reference on the monitors behind you for purposes of introducing this item. I wanted to, before we dive into the details of the case specifically, I wanted to give you some contextual background regarding process, procedure, and kind of how staff has approached this development project in its review. So real quickly, am I a panelist now, Patty? Well, I was going to share the location map for reference, but we're not quite in the. There we go. So the project is in the Wellington Business Center. This is on the south end of town along the I-25 west frontage road. I'll share it as soon as I can here. It's not on you, Patty. This is on the process. There we go. So here's the location map for reference. And the property is zoned C3, mixed use commercial, as is the adjacent properties. The development proposal submitted by the applicant was for a site development plan. This property is approximately 9 and some change acres in size. And it's really kind of a logical continuation of the existing commercial development there at Wine Cup and the frontage road. And the applicant originally submitted this development proposal as just the site plan. And in staff's review of the site plan proposal, we identified a couple of things that we needed to address, just kind of cleanup items. There were some existing platted easements on this property for drainage and utility easements. The applicant desired to change some building locations from the way it was originally laid out to kind of orient those buildings in a different fashion that was more amenable to the site. And some of those building footprints were over the top of utility easements that can be easily vacated to make way for some of those structures. Some easements need to be vacated for that purpose. Other utility infrastructure was proposed to be looped through the site to meet the town's requirements and needed easements dedicated for public infrastructure. And and the lot line between what was originally platted as Lot 7 and Lot 8 needed to be moved slightly, not dramatically, but a little bit. And so when we looked at this and as a staff reviewing agency, those kind of elements of vacating easements, dedicating new easements, and moving a lot line, all three of those could have been handled via different processes, but the simplest, easiest, and cleanest way to do it was to have the applicant apply for a preliminary plat and just do one document to clean up all those items all through a public hearing process, and the result being a clean, finished one-pager that says, this is the property lines that you're working with and all the easement dedications. So we asked the applicant to go down that path, and they agreed to do that to keep this a clean process. We could have handled that differently, but it wouldn't have been as clean. And so that for that preliminary plat, it does put it into a public hearing process. So for your applications tonight, we are presenting the site development plan for the commercial development, and we are presenting the preliminary plat. The processes and procedures are outlined in your staff packet as well as the appropriate findings for approval for each of those cases. I do want to also point out that we are presenting this as a concurrent review, meaning it's all one development. You can see it very plainly in the plan sets, but there are two separate processes going on concurrently. The Planning Commission has the final approval on a site development plan, and on a preliminary plat, you make a recommendation that gets forwarded to the Board of Trustees for consideration. Once those processes are satisfied, a final plat, the final version of the document is brought back for a final review and approval. So I just wanted to kind of highlight why we're going through the processes, that it is a concurrent review process. There will be a final plat brought back to the Planning Commission at a later date if these approvals advance tonight. But I just wanted to kind of explain the nuance of how this project is being presented. It's really one quality development project, but it had a couple of layers that we wanted to explain. Are there any questions regarding the processes that are at play tonight before I dive into an introduction for the project itself?
So based on your description, then there was no need to go through any kind of Board of Adjustment process.
Correct. And for this application, there were no variances being requested from any of the development standards. So the Board of Adjustments processes are not applicable to this development as proposed.
Great, thanks. And second question is on the public hearing piece, does this meeting constitute the public hearing, or is that a separate event that will happen?
Yes, thank you for the question. So the Planning Commission will conduct a public hearing for the preliminary plat, and the Board of Trustees will also conduct a public hearing. So both entities do a hearing. And then both entities will do a hearing for the final plat also.
So is tonight the Planning Commission's public hearing
Yes.
event? Yeah.
Yes, it will be. Thank you for the questions. Are there any others? Okay, then I'm going to dive into a review of the public hearing procedures. I do this to make sure that everyone participating knows what the steps are and the appropriate places for when they can speak up. So this is just an overview, then we'll go back and we'll go through it in person. So we start every public hearing with a disclosure of any conflicts of interest and any ex parte communications. Conflicts of interest are financial or partnership involvement in a project, and disclosure of ex parte communications are any communications that happen outside of a public hearing that might lend information that influence a decision, and we share that publicly so everyone involved has the same information to react to. Then we'll after disclosures, staff, Cody, will present the introduction to the development proposal from a planning staff's perspective. The applicant will also have an opportunity to share any additional information if they choose. That's not a requirement, but it's an option. And then if the Planning Commission has any questions regarding the information being presented, clarifying questions, then you'll have an opportunity to ask those questions on what was presented. We'll open it up to a public hearing. This is where we invite members of the public to come up, and each has 3 minutes. I don't believe we have any here tonight, but in order for following due process, we give everyone an opportunity to be heard. Following public comments, we would then close the public hearing, and no further public comments can be accepted after the public hearing is closed. The applicant will have an opportunity to respond to any of the comments that were heard, and staff will have an opportunity to provide closing comments to respond to any comments. Following closing comments from the applicant and staff, that is the conclusion of the public hearing of that part, which is the record for that decision. And then the board, or in this case, the Planning Commission, can open deliberations. This is where you talk amongst yourselves. You weigh the merits of the case, you consider the findings for approval, and following deliberations, you then proceed with a motion and a vote to make the decision. Staff has presented this as a site development proposal that also includes the preliminary plat. We recommended one motion for both. It seems like if one is approved, the other would be approved. That doesn't have to be the case, but that's how we presented it. If the commission has any desire to consider alternative motions or questions, staff is here to help guide you through that discussion. Are there any questions regarding the public hearing procedures for tonight? Excellent. Then I will move on to the introduction. As I mentioned, this property, this is where the record starts, for your public hearing process. So I'm sharing the screen again, same picture that was just up. Property is lot 7 and lot 8, Wellington Business Center. It's on the south side of town along the I-25 frontage road. The applicant is proposing to develop this site for commercial purposes. The property is zoned C3 mixed-use commercial, as is the surrounding properties to the north and the south. It does abut residential properties to the west of the site. The property north of this was developed in a couple of different phases, and you see the mixed-use commercial buildings that have been constructed over a period of time. There are 2 additional building sites in that north approval that are likely still coming in the near future. The developer shares an access point from the frontage road to this particular property, and their development plan proposes to continue that to the south for the next phases. The proposal for the site development will be a phased approach, beginning with the multi-tenant commercial building on the east side of the site, closest to the frontage road, with phases for the mixed tenant buildings on the west side coming second, and then the middle building in the middle of the site being the third phase, final phasing to be determined, but the highest priority for the developer has been to tackle the east building first. The phased development approach can be accomplished through the town's approval procedures for a site development plan. We asked the applicant to provide the full site plan for consideration to see how the phases would contextually relate to each other and to make sure that the full site was designed with adequate utilities, access, vehicle, parking, and et cetera, for the full site build out, so that we didn't miss a step down the road and realize that for a subsequent phase, we didn't have everything that was needed to satisfy the full site. So the applicant has done a really nice job of presenting all of the information for the full site, but the construction of it would be the phased portion of it. As I mentioned, we are looking at this as concurrent review. The preliminary plat component, I'm going to switch screens here. Forget that I can't just have to stop sharing and change documents. There we go. So this is the site development plan layout. I know it's small here. This is in your packet as well, so you've had a chance to look at it. But I wanted to at least bring it up for context for the online viewers in the record. So you can kind of see how this was laid out for development patterns. I'm going to switch to another screen here to also show you the plat. This looks awkward on your end, but there's a ribbon for the Zoom meeting at the top that I can't move around, so I have to. There, I got it. Sorry about that. Here's the preliminary plat. So you can see this is contextually, it's the same 4 corners of the overall development site. There's still 2 lots as there are platted today. And this is the area where there's an easement that's proposed to be vacated, and that vacation process can happen as part of a plat. That's why we do a public hearing. And then rededication of utility easements through the middle of the site for utility purposes, water line and sewer access for these buildings. So this, you can see this is a much cleaner 1-page document than the multiple pages that we would have required to do separate easement dedications and exhibits and the legal language for those boundaries. So this was that clean approach that we had requested, and the applicant was willing to work with us on that. To kind of note for the purposes of the preliminary plat and functions, one of the concerns that staff had raised early on was when we have 2 separate lots and only 1 driveway access point, we've requested that they guarantee access to the western lot, across lot 1 in this case. I'm sorry, lot 2 is on the east, lot 1 is on the west. The way that the applicant is accomplishing the public access is through a blanket access, drainage, and utility easement. And that blanket easement allows vehicles to cross both lots and circulate within the site without having to get permission from a separate ownership. And the reason that's important is that we don't want to landlock a lot. So if the lots sell to different owners down the road, someone says, no, I'm just going to put up a gate and you can't get there. The easement provides access across both lots. And the same for drainage, so that we don't end up with a situation where surface water draining through a parking lot doesn't get impounded and blocked by another property owner. It provides a mechanism to drain the site south where it naturally goes. So that all of those things are accomplished on this plat and would run with the land, so that those are secured in perpetuity for the site, so that there's no question coming back to us later on why wasn't this accomplished. So in your packet, we outlined the process for both the site plan and the preliminary plat. I'm going to let this the screen kind of rest on the site development plan for a second here for the rest of the introduction purposes. But your processes are outlined in your packet. I also gave you handouts with the findings for approval that are considered. And in the planning staff report, we went through each of those findings one by one and kind of gave you staff's opinion of the findings and whether they were satisfied or not. And because you had a chance to read that, I don't want to go through every single detail. That staff report is in the packet as part of that record. But I don't want to spend a ton of time going over every single detail. So I just wanted to hit a couple of the highlights in terms of the site development plan, commercial development, logical continuation of the existing commercial. Makes a lot of sense for the town's comprehensive plan. This was identified as a commercial area. The property itself has gone through a rezoning from light industrial to mixed-use commercial, which was more consistent with that frontage road appearance, the existing development, and particularly the residential development to the east. We did ask the applicant to do some work with the building orientation to help break up some of the larger long buildings right adjacent to the residential. And we asked them to break that up in terms of the size for massing and scale. And we also asked that they come back in and soften that appearance using some different landscaping techniques. Our concern was that large of a building directly across the street from front yards of residences wouldn't be a compatible transition, but we feel confident that the setback for the drainage, the softened landscaping, and breaking up the building into two buildings there on that west side would help transition this down to the residential scale better than one monolithic building. Our hope is that one of the benefits of a site development like this, with the buildings oriented north to south instead of east to west like the other buildings to the north of this, is that will help create a little bit more of a sound wall for I-25 traffic noise. There's a real direct correlation between sound waves and direction, and any physical barrier between those will help move those sound waves upwards and help provide some a lessening effect to the adjacent residences. So that was part of the reasoning for changing the orientation here. The kind of consistency with the comprehensive plan, consistency with the intent of the zone district were satisfied from a staff perspective. The bulk of your staff report for the site development portion was focused on Article 5 of the zoning code for the development standards. That gets into your lighting, your landscaping, your parking lot access and parking lot numbers. And the staff report details out the considerations that staff put into there. We did look at some other things from development standards, Article 5 of the land use code. And in staff's opinion, they were satisfied. We didn't detail every single thing in the staff report because we've got red line comments that we give to the applicant that they'll clean up as part of this process as well. And 12 pages, your report was already kind of lengthy. An example there would be like signage. all the tenants aren't identified yet, so we know that there'll be more signage details forthcoming. They've identified signage or freestanding signage locations on the site plan, but building signage will be based on the tenant mix, and each applicant will go through their own permitting process to do those. So we didn't feel that the building signage would be appropriate to identify at the site plan at this time. There's an administrative process for staff to review those and make sure that they comply with the development standards for Article 5. But the landscaping looked good. Lighting was well lit. There's a tight window for lighting to hit to provide the maximum or to provide the minimum amount of illumination necessary and not hit the maximums. There was a really nice effort put into making sure the site was well lit. There were a couple of areas that staff identified in the staff report where illumination levels were a little bit low in the parking lot, and it would request a look to make sure that those areas are adequately lit. One of the details we asked the applicant to look at closely on this was the rooftop screening. We've had some commercial developments in the past where there is a requirement for all mechanical equipment and rooftop units to be screened from public view, and that hasn't always been caught for other commercial developments. So we asked them to really take a close look at that on this one. And between the pitch of the roof and the parapet walls proposed on the buildings, most of the rooftop units will be screened by the building itself. There are a couple that, depending on the views from a public roadway, some of the mechanical units could be visible, and in those instances, the applicant is proposing a rooftop unit screen, which is like a small fence that's mounted on the roof to help enclose those areas. So that was one of the architectural elements that staff asked them to look at, and they have accomplished that to staff's satisfaction. Building materials were satisfactory from staff's opinion. Nice articulation in the architecture and the storefront. Some awnings and canopies really add elements for the human scale, and the entrances are clearly identified. The standing seam metal or architectural metal panels are an allowed use or an allowed material for commercial developments, and the applicant has proposed a nice mix of some stone veneer and architectural embellishments to help soften that appearance. Staff did agree that on the west building along Globe Flower, the architecture gets a little bit slim there because of the nature of the building, and it's not a storefront. It's not prone to a lot of window openings because it's a storage area, and you can't store things very well next to a window. So we did kind of encourage that additional increase in landscaping materials to help soften the view along those walls on those west buildings. Overall, though, a very good and detailed site plan. Staff was satisfied with the parking, bicycle parking, and I should point out too the pedestrian access, or the vehicle and pedestrian access. Staff did not encourage the applicant to pursue vehicle access onto Globe Flower Street to protect the separation between commercial traffic and residential roadways, residential traffic. But we felt very strongly that it would be important to capture a pedestrian connection for bike and foot traffic to the site. Being Zone C3 commercial, we expect to see a mix of restaurants, office uses, service uses, and it would be a little bit of a travesty if those nearest residents didn't have a clear path to get there and had to go all the way out to the frontage road just to access the businesses. So we did ask for the pedestrian connection, and the applicant has provided that. It aligns very nicely with the existing curb ramps on Globe Flower and Globe Flower going west is a kind of not a through street, but it provides good continuity from that subdivision all the way to the railroad tracks to this commercial site with that clear ADA accessible crossing there. So staff felt that requirement was satisfied through this proposal. To shift gears just a little bit, I gotta try this again to rearrange the tabs. Need to find an easier way to do this next time. The things you never thought you'd have to worry about. The Zoom meeting has a ribbon there that makes it inaccessible. Going back to your preliminary plat, this is the portion that required the public hearing. I presented the site plan or the site development proposal first, so you could see the contextual relationships between the two. For the preliminary plat, the lot line between existing lot 7 and lot 8 and proposed lot 1, lot 2 of this amended plat is in nearly the same location, but it changes slightly, probably almost imperceptibly, but it was needed to meet the building separation for building codes. We do have the easements that I mentioned before, and I want to also note that the nature of the blanket easement for circulation, vehicle access, drainage, you don't typically put a building in an easement. And so for the purposes of this development plan, there are these boxes drawn around the footprints of the buildings that are exclusions, meaning the entire site is covered by the access and drainage easement. And these rectangles for the building footprints are specifically excluded from that, allowing the building locations to happen there. So staff supports that approach from a plat standpoint. The public hearing for the plat, all the proper notices were provided. We mail notices to owners within 500 feet of the property boundary. We advertised it in the Fort Collins, Coloradoan, and the applicant posted a sign on or 2 signs on the site in advance of the hearing. And all of those were accomplished 15 days prior to tonight's hearing. So your requirements for public notice have been adequately provided for this hearing tonight. From a procedure standpoint, the conditions or the criteria for approval were evaluated by staff and are included in your packet. Staff found that all of those were reasonably satisfied, and the details are included in your staff report packet. Several of the items are similar in nature to the site development plan, so I don't want to repeat those. But to kind of give you an idea of what happens next on this preliminary plat, if the lot arrangement, access controls, and easement dedications are consistent with the Planning Commission's approval process, the applicant would move on to final design for utility infrastructure, create the final plat drawing, and work with town staff on a development agreement for design and installation of the public infrastructure components to this. We will also work with the developer on the phasing for turn lanes on the I-25 frontage road. As part of a plat process, we review the traffic impact study, which the applicant provided. It went through a review process with the town. We also referred it to CDOT, Colorado Department of Transportation, for the frontage road, which is their jurisdiction. And what we got back from the comments from CDOT was that the phase 1 for the proposed site did not meet the state highway access control requirements for a turn lane. When I worded that kind of funny, so let me take a step back. The phase 1 does not require a turn lane for the phase 1 development. So when I said it doesn't meet the requirements, I mean, it doesn't trip the threshold for needing a turn lane. CDOT's comments indicated that phase 2 development could trigger the need for turn lanes on the frontage road. And so what CDOT requested was when phase 2 or prior to phase 2 beginning, to resubmit a memo or modification to the traffic impact study, verifying whether the turn lane is required or not. And staff would be working with the developer to ensure that the development agreement states clearly that if it requires a turn lane, that they're required to build that prior to phase 2. Clear as mud. I worded that a little awkwardly, so I'm happy to pause if there's questions. Okay, good. So that was a little bit nuanced with the phasing plan and the requirements for turn lanes, but based on that explanation and the additional steps that will come later, staff is confident that that all the criteria will be satisfied as part of the plat process. I think those, and then I mentioned the pedestrian access, which we did agree with and was provided, and that is accomplished via the blanket access easement over the site. So those are the highlights. If there's other details, you can certainly ask those questions as we go throughout the process. But at this point, from an introductory standpoint and staff's perspective, I will conclude my comments and Chairman, I will turn it back over to you to see if the applicant wants to share any additional information.
Thank you, Mr. Bird, for the presentation and all the clarifications.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, anything to add to that? Do you have a presentation? Please.
We're extremely excited to be embarking upon this mixed-use, 3-year uphill both ways process in the snow, and it was cold. So, yeah, we're, I think that Cody nailed every single thing. I don't know what I could follow up with that. I could, the photometrics maybe, I don't think you used that word. I just did. So we'll get that buttoned up in that one little corner, so we don't want that vagrant hanging out in the shadows of Wellington. We want him to be illuminated and removed immediately. I'm just kidding. Yeah, the design, I like the way Cody articulated the pedestrian accessibility, especially for the people that are living in that area. And I hadn't even thought about it being an acoustical genius that I am, that we're also providing a lovely buffer for those people from I-25. And so that's just another wonderful thing that we're doing. So I hope that you approve this, and I hope if there's any questions, we're here, we're not going anywhere. We've been here for 3 years trying to get it done, and I think we're getting close. Yeah, we'll leave this in your care, custody, control to move forward. Thank you.
Okay. I may call you back up just in case there are questions, but anybody from the board have anything for staff or the applicant?
I got a couple questions. So what are the conditions that would trigger a turn lane? Do they disclose what those are?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So when we're looking at turn lane requirements, it's usually based on traffic volume, traffic speeds for the adjacent roadway. It all comes down to engineering standards and details. The state has their own set of criteria for their roadways. The town has our own criteria. In this instance, it was volume. The number of trips expected to be generated by the proposed development for phase 1 did not exceed the number of vehicle trips that the state looks at as needing a turn lane. If it does, which it may for phase 2, then the turn lane would be required, and it defines the length of the taper for how much stopping distance is needed to make the turn, or acceleration distance to get up to speed for the adjacent roadway. But the state's state highway access control standards identifies a vehicle threshold that this was under. I don't have the number right offhand.
Yeah, it's volume. Yeah, I get it.
It's volume and traffic speed. Sometimes other considerations are the types of vehicles, like if they're heavy excess weight vehicles that take longer to decelerate and accelerate due to momentum, that has a different threshold, but that's not a factor for this development. It's largely based on just your personal vehicle trips.
So does either the preliminary plat or the final plat, will it assume a turn lane? Or is that something that will have to be revisited?
So great question. What we typically do when it's, if the development for phase 1 is allowed and it doesn't require it, but phase 2 might, we'll enter into a development agreement with the owner of the property that outlines a review requirement. So the development agreement is a legal document that gets recorded with the property, but it'll outline that prior to phase 2 beginning construction, the applicant will have to submit a revised traffic impact study that evaluates all the same conditions the first time went around, look at those traffic volumes, assess whether or not it triggers the requirement under the State Highway Access Control Manual. And if it does, the development agreement spells out that the applicant is required to install that prior to phase 2 being constructed.
Okay, so I heard no.
That would be the short answer.
Thank you.
Anything else? Staff, applicant,
I had a couple questions.
Mr. Whitehouse?
So, just curious for the irrigation system, potable or non-potable water?
Great question. The non-pot's not accessible on the commercial lots, is it?
I'm sure it's not possible.
Oh. Okay.
The non-pot already runs
Could you come to the microphone, please?
I'm Shane Ritchie. I'm the civil engineer on the project, Ombre Civil. Do I have to do my address still? Okay. I feel like gotta walk up here, yeah, mother's maiden name. I am not the irrigation designer, but I've been involved in the project, for quite a while and I have a pretty good feeling. The non-pot already services those trees, the existing trees. And I believe that the irrigation, I think there's 2 irrigation point of connections shown on the landscape plan and then coordinated over to my plan that I think one's on the northeast corner of the site and then the other one might be where those existing trees are. And I'm fairly certain that those are non-pot. I could be wrong on that. I think it's probably identified in the plan set though. But the existing nature of it, I thought indicated it was non-pot. If that helps, hopefully.
Okay, no right or wrong answer.
Also, I guess now that I'm up here, I wanted to just acknowledge all of the effort that staff has done to get this project where it's at. It can be really difficult to bring people that are not experts in this or doing this on a weekly basis like you into the fold on what the process is and what the best way to achieve this outcome is. And without their efforts, we would not be going with this process of cleaning everything up and going with a replat. We would have been doing this piecemeal. It took a lot of effort on the town's part to get us where we're at. And so that's just greatly appreciated.
I did have another, I think it's just more of a clarification because,
Mr. Whitehouse?
yes,
Before you move on to your next one, I wanted to circle back quickly.
of course.
I pulled up
Pardon
the
me.
plan. No, thank you. Appreciate the pause. What Mr. Ritchie identified was accurate on the plan set. There are 2 point of connections on the irrigation system to the north lots, which would indicate the non-potable system. We may reach out to the irrigation designer to verify the meter size and if they need to sub-meter that for purposes of the HOA that manages the non-pot system. But I made myself a note to follow up on that, but I did confirm that what Mr. Ritchie shared was accurate.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the
Yeah, thank you.
clarification. And the other question I have, and this is, I think on page 7, and this is not a big deal at all. I'm just puzzled. So, it's doing something weird. What else is new? I think it calls out the parking spots will be 9 feet by 18 feet. Although when you look at the drawing, it shows the width is on the site plan shows 10 feet by 20 feet. And I think one of them shows the length as 19 feet. So again, I saw sort of a inconsistency between what was written and what I saw on the plans. And I didn't know if there's any, it looks like they're 10 feet wide and 20 or 19 feet long.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Mr. Ritchie respond while he's walking up here. Staff noted a similar instance where some of the parking spaces in kind of the northern area of the site were 18-foot depth, 9-foot width, and then other areas closer to the buildings were identified at 10-foot width, 20-foot depth. The town's minimum requirements are 18 by 9. So all of those labeling for the entire site were within the town's minimum requirements for parking lot size or parking space size. But if it's a labeling issue or a dimensioning issue, we can certainly clean that up. But staff looked at it from the perspective it meets the minimum.
Okay, I was just puzzled. I was looking for some clarity. I don't have any concerns about it.
I'm just going based off of memory because I don't have sheet 7 in front of me, but I'm fairly certain all of them are 10 by 20. If there's an instance where it's less than that, it would be in an area where you have a landscape island that's not being like filled over onto like a sidewalk that's at meeting the minimum standards. So there may be a little bit of an overhang, but the 10 by 20 dimension was something that the client desired. So it's my recollection that all of them are that dimension and maybe one of the labels got moved or something like that.
No, what I see in the plans, I see dimensions of 10 feet in width and, and they vary slightly from 20 feet to 19 feet in length. And so I was just, again, I was not concerned, but I just was kind of scratching my head. That's all.
Is sheet 7 my sheet or is that an architectural sheet?
And just for reference, while you're looking for that, page 11, down towards third bullet from the bottom, shows the 9x18 minimum requirement that Cody was referencing.
Thank you.
So I'm not looking at sheet 7, but on one of Ombre's plan sheets, you can see the labeling for the dimensions and what Mr. Ritchie was explaining kind of on the very north end there. There is a landscape island between the circulation aisle and the parking spaces. You need those landscaping strips to be a minimum width for tree and other shrub success rates. So it does appear that to maintain the circulation aisles and the landscape width for successful vegetation, that the parking spaces were reduced in some areas. I'll hand this sheet to Mr. Ritchie if he wants to take a quick look at it as well. I didn't bring reading glasses for you though.
Yeah, so I think specifically in those parking bays to the north, we have a 5.8 foot landscape island. And I think we made the decision to not narrow that anymore so that you can keep a 5 foot. Those are 18-foot parking stalls, and everywhere else 10 by 20, I believe, is the standard. I honestly, if I'm being honest, I don't remember reducing that to 18, but I think that's still the right decision. And I'm trying to see another parking island that does that same thing. I don't think it exists. But yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, it clarifies everything. I mean, I just know with some of the bigger trucks now, 9 foot wide's gonna be really tight. So I'm glad you're going to the little wider 10, so that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Big trucks, big spaces. Okay.
Sorry, I got a couple more. Mr. Bird, there were several instances where you said you had made recommendations to the applicant. Are the recommendations that you made, is that part of the redlining that they're going to be updating, or is that reflected in their application?
Yeah, so what we try to do as a staff is we try to give in the planning report that goes to the commission, the details that the planning commission may want to weigh in on, like the lighting effects, the landscaping effects, intent of vehicle access and pedestrian access. Other details like use this engineering standard, not this engineering standard. The planning commission doesn't review engineering, so we keep those in the red lines and give that back to the applicant. They know that they have to address those comments too. And from the planning standpoint, sometimes it's labeling, sometimes it's a dimensional, discrepancy. Was it this or this? Kind of like the parking comments there. That wasn't one of the planning comments because we felt they all met the minimums, but just by way of example. And we do provide those back to the applicant, and staff coordinates with them to make sure all of those get cleaned up for the town staff to accept the final drawings.
Great, thank you. And then a question for the applicant. What is the timing, rough timing between the phases? Like, is this over the next 3 years, 5 years?
Yeah, I would spread it out to that 3 to 5 years, I bet you. Every single time you think it's certain.
Yeah, who knows, right?
Yeah, it's
And then,
we don't want to drag it out forever, but, and I think too, the probability of getting it done, it's cash flow money. What's gonna drive this thing?
No,
What's
I
gonna
got
drive the
you. No, that's
market? If we
good.
start getting this thing filled up and sooner than later, then you're gonna want to do it, right? So if that'll dictate the policy.
all right, super. And I love what you're doing. One more question.
Yep.
What types of businesses are you expecting or planning for in that phase 1? Do you have a
I don't
sense
know
of
if I'm
that?
at liberty to talk about all of this stuff.
And you
but
may not
there's,
be, and that's okay.
But it's gonna be a definite mixed use of, the office space, restaurants,
Yeah, I could, say too, from past multiple tenant developments, it's often a challenge to identify all of the tenants, but from a town's perspective and planning commission perspective, we rely on the table of allowed uses. If it's in the C3 zone district, it's primarily restaurants, retail, office, business types. So if it's not on that list of allowed uses, then it doesn't get to go in that development.
Sure.
And so we know that there's some phasing to that, from a development standpoint, that you have to have a building to attract tenants, and you attract your tenants based on your allowed uses. And that's typically what we follow.
Yeah, I was just curious, just from this is something that I think the town will be excited about, right?
I would hope
And-
so, yeah.
Yeah, and depending on what goes in, they'll be either more or less excited about it, right? It's just really more of a curiosity than anything else. Thank you.
Yep, you bet.
Okay, anything else? All right, we have no public here, but just for the sake of staying consistent with public hearing procedures, I'm gonna formally open the public hearing portion of the meeting as it is. And with no public to make any comments, I will formally close the public hearing portion of this meeting. I do just like using the gavel. It is a really nice site plan, fellas. Thank you for the clarity. Thank you for all the details. It's one of the better ones we've seen, so much appreciated on this end as well.
Do we also want to capture conflicts of interest or ex parte as well officially?
Oh, thank you. Yes, we should do that. And I apologize. It was on my list to ask for, and I reviewed the process and forgot to ask. So,
We can capture it before everything's completely dismissed on it.
yeah, and that's not a fatal flaw, because the planning commission hasn't entered into deliberations yet. So if you could please disclose any conflicts of interest, we'll do that one first, and then we'll go on second to ex partes.
None.
None?
Yeah, I don't believe I have a conflict of interest other than I do know Mr. Leary from about 5 years back that I actually purchased our building from him and his partners. So, but that was far before any of this was coming up or anything, so.
I,
wanna share that.
thank you, Commissioner Kanak. I know exactly what you're referring to, but for the record, could you please explain your existing business location is not a part of this site? And
Oh, okay, yes, not at all. We have Kanak Automotive on Cleveland Avenue and Main Street, downtown core. And we had just been renters and had the opportunity to purchase it, and we did. So, and we're still there now, so, yeah.
okay, and as part of that,
And no, there was no, I had no idea that they were even looking into Wellington.
okay, and there's no additional business relationships between the applicant and your business relative to this development proposal?
None.
Okay.
He
Thank you.
drives European cars.
Thank you for the clarifications, Commissioner Knack. Ex
and
parte
yes.
communications,
Yep.
have there been any ex parte communications, meaning communications relative to this proposal that happened outside of a public meeting?
None.
None?
Perfect. Thank you for taking a step back and going over those procedural elements. I appreciate the reminder.
You're turning into more of like dance appians every day, aren't you? Getting up in everyone's business.
Have to.
You live.
Safety first, right? Okay, well, since we ran through questions and I didn't see any follow-up questions, just in that short amount of time, does anybody have anything else for staff or the applicant? Be your last chance. Okay, any closing comments or anything else before we move to vote? Mr. Bird,
I don't have any further comments. Thank you.
fellas, you guys are good? Yeah, it's coming, don't worry. Okay, well, with no further questions, anyone have a motion to approve, deny?
So I just have just a comment. I know, Mr. Bird, you recommended one motion versus two separate motions. My question would be, would there be any reason why it might make sense to have two separate motions? Just thinking down the line, right? An unintended consequence of something coming up that might address one issue but not both. My concern is if we have one motion, then the whole thing's got to circle back around versus two separate motions. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So staff presented this as one motion because we looked at this as one development proposal. And we asked the applicant to be very transparent in the full site development plan to be able to see the relationships between the buildings, the phasing, the circulation, access and drainage and all those components. So to get straight to your point, I don't think that it matters one way or the other procedurally. If the planning commission supports approval of the site plan and approval of the preliminary plat, I'm not suggesting that you need to make a decision in this way, but I would just as an example, if you approved it as one motion, the effect of that would be that the site plan is approved and the applicant's preliminary plat can advance to the next step. And the final step still has to come back as a final plat to the planning commission. So alternatively, two separate motions, one for the site plan would still result in an approved site plan. And the preliminary plat could still be approved preliminary plat that would still bring a final back to the planning commission. So in that context, it doesn't really matter whether it's one motion or two. If the planning commission decided for any reason you didn't want to approve the preliminary plat or didn't want to approve the site plan, that could be a different conversation. And we can help you navigate some alternatives if that's desired.
Okay, so just to clarify, if we approve in one motion, no final plat will come back to us.
The final plat has to come back.
So it's going to come back to us regardless.
Correct.
Okay, so it doesn't really seem like it makes that big of a difference.
I think it's 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other, and right or wrong, staff tried to keep it as simple as possible and felt like one motion would suffice. But I'm happy to help walk you through options if you want to consider different
Okay.
alternatives.
Yeah, I'll defer to the other commissioners on that.
I have no issue, doing it as one motion. If other people have other again, I think as Mr. Byrd has suggested, ultimately they're going to get approved whether two motions or one. I'm fine with one if other people feel the same way.
Correct. The end result from a single motion is the same as splitting it up into two motions, regardless of what happens.
I
approved or
agree.
denied.
We've done it both ways. So.
Yeah. For sake of simplicity, if anyone has a singular motion they'd like to offer.
I make a motion that we approve the site development plan and the preliminary plat of lot 7-8 Wellington Business Center.
Second?
Okay, roll call, please, Patty. Hang on, Cody's going for the microphone.
Chairman, I was just going to clarify for the sake of the record, now that there's a motion and a second on the table, is there any further deliberation?
I don't believe we need any, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, roll call.
Knack,
Yes.
Whitehouse,
Yes.
McCaffrey,
Yes.
Carmen,
Yes.
Sarter.
Yes. Okay. Motion approved. Congratulations, fellas.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Got a second to clear out.
Can I act? Good job.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
very much.
You're welcome. You guys as well.
Thanks.
You're good seeing you again. Take care.
Upstairs.
I know, yeah, I haven't played much since then. Since the last tournament I played in.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Play at Water Valley.
Awesome, you too.
The nicer it is, somehow I played it. That's good. Change. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. All right, 8. Hey, fellas, we're not quite done with our regular meeting. Nope. You guys are free to go. We still have more action items to go, though. Nope, you're good to go. Thanks, fellas. The excitement got a hold of them.
I understand. It's an exciting project.
Yeah. Yes, moving forward, communications, Mr. Byrd.
Wanted to keep this fairly short, but I did have a couple things I wanted to share. In your packet, you'll see the third quarter report for residential building permits and lot inventory, as well as our commercial inventory. Not a lot of changes there, but I'm happy to respond to any questions. We do expect residential building permits to have a little bit of an uptick here in the fourth quarter. We've got a couple of builders that are working on getting plans submitted, so we expect that to see a fourth quarter, a little bit of a jump there, but nothing that's not already been anticipated. You can see from that report, we are still under our projected for the year. We may come close to hitting projected if things shake out the way we anticipate that they will. If you have any questions on the residential report, please holler at me or ask me after the meeting. The other communications I wanted to share, I think we announced it at the last meeting, but maybe we didn't. Patty's new role. No, Patty, do you want to say a few words? Okay, well then I'll share for her. The Planning Commission has been very fortunate over the last 6 years to have Patty Lundy support us in this role. And we are sad that Patty will not be a strong part of the Planning Commission in the future, but we're very pleased to announce that Patty has transitioned to our town finance department as our town controller. So she's accepted a new role, still with the town. So we thank Patty for all of her support over the years for planning the Planning Commission. We will be transitioning some of her roles and responsibilities to other staff now as she takes on her new finance department role.
Congratulations. It's gonna be tough shoes to fill. I've seen 2 or 3 people in that position over the last 19 years and by far away the best.
I was there once before, so we'll keep going.
Nice. Congrats, Patty.
So we do thank Patty for all of her support. And which leads me to my next announcement. We have in the back of the room, if you want to give a wave, Aiden Checkett is our new planner one. He's been on the job for 1 week. So we didn't have him doing any presentations tonight. He wasn't a part of that review. But you can expect to see Aiden more heavily involved in other planning applications and planning topics as we move forward. And the other new staff announcement I wanted to make is we've also hired a planner 3. Her name is Brittany Lenore. She had a planned trip for her schedule, so she was not available to be here tonight, but you can expect to meet Brittany at the November meeting. So we're very excited to have 2 new talented planners as part of our team. And we look forward to having them presenting some of these application items to you in the future so you don't have to listen to just me.
We enjoy listening to you.
You'll get some variety. But so those were my announcements. At this point in time, I don't have a public hearing item on the schedule for November, for the November planning meeting. If other items come to light, we will certainly share that with you. We do plan on meeting, and I'll be working on putting together communications and possibly a work session for items relevant for November.
So no public hearing and no action items as of right now.
Correct.
Okay,
Those are my announcements.
perfect. Anything else? Good deal. Adjourned.
Thank you.
Yeah.